We're going to go into our top 10 tips for putting an industry resume together. And then from that, we'll take questions from you. My name is Shilpa Gedwal. I'm the Career Resources Specialist at ASM, so I manage their digital career content.
My name is Rich Feltz. I'm a senior microbiologist, research scientist at a Fortune 500 medical devices manufacturer. I've been on the job hunt myself recently and done an awful lot of interviewing of new people, and I've been a hiring manager to bring people on board.
My first tip is that there's a big difference between a CV and a resume. And so typically in the US, a CV is a comprehensive list of everything you've done, all your publications, all your research experiences, how many people you've mentored. Whereas a resume is typically 1 to 2 pages, and it's shortened. It's anything that's relevant to the job posting that you put on your resume. And the big thing about resumes is they should be created so that they're very easy to read and that it's skimmable. Most applications will tell you which one to submit. They'll tell you whether they want a CV or a resume, so follow those instructions. My second tip is that your resume can be used for many different purposes. One can be for networking, so when you're out and about at conferences like this, you can pass out your resume along with your business card. It can be also the same thing that's put onto your LinkedIn pages and used for networking that way. Your primary reason for putting a resume together is to apply for a job. So typically there's a job posting and then you write up your resume to fit that job posting. Usually your resume is the starting point for questions when you go for interviews. So that's really what an interviewer will use to start asking you questions about yourself.
Tip number 3, format your resume as a resume. You're just going to want 1 or 2 pages. If you're very new to the market, 1 page might be enough. You want it nice and clean with a lot of white space to make it very easy to read, because people are going to be going through large numbers of resumes and they're not looking for your entire career history. They're just looking for, do you match the job description? Are you what they need? Have nice clear headers, short, brief bullet points, again, easy to read, no fancy typefaces, no colors, no emojis, nothing that looks foolish or cluttered, just very professional, very simple, very clean. 12-point font, usually Calibri or Arial are good ones, easy to read.
All right, so it's for tip number 4. You want to always tailor your resume to the job description. And so when you get a job, when you look at a job posting, it's typically a call for help. So the employer needs someone to fill a gap, to complete a project, and so they're looking for someone with specific skill sets. And so with that in mind, when you're putting your resume together and you're tailoring it to that job description, one way of going about it is to identify what types of skills and experiences that job posting is asking for, and then ask yourself, what do you have that matches that job posting? And then that's what you want to put into your resume, and you want to order those sections based off of the importance and relevance to the employer. Because typically what they see is that first 1/3 of a page, and so they want to see right away whether you fit that job posting. Tip number 5 is some companies, they're going to use software programs to filter through your resumes. And so in order to make it to the top of the list, you want to use keywords. So when you read any job posting, there's typically specific skills or experiences or number of years that they're asking for a certain set of experiences. So what you want to do is make sure that you mirror what that job posting has on your resume. So use the same keywords that job posting has when you're putting your resume together.
Tip number 6, contact information. At the very top of your resume should have your name in nice, big, clean lettering. If it's doctor, then Dr. Jane Doe, PhD or MD. You may add an MS or a MedTech certification after that. You'll want your permanent address, a phone number where recruiters or hiring managers can reach you, and an email account. I'd recommend creating a Gmail account just for the job hunt. That way, once the hunt is over, you don't have to be bothered by spam emails for the next 2 years. And the email should be your first name dot last name at gmail.com, not, kegstand24 or any of that sort of thing. You might also put a URL to your LinkedIn profile up there as well.
So for tip number 7, any resume that you put together, you want to, after your contact information, you want a summary of qualifications. And so what I mean by this is it's going to be about 3 to 5 bullet points, and it's going to highlight the skills that employer is looking for that you do really well. And so this is probably the most important part of the resume, because this is what an employer will see first, and they'll decide whether to continue reading your resume or move on to the next one. In this section, you want to highlight any accomplishments that you have that is relevant to the job posting.
Tip number 8. Oftentimes you'll see resumes with education listed up near the top. Not for an industry job hunt. You put those at the bottom. All right, your work experience comes right after the professional summary Shilpa mentioned. And you can list postdocs, internships, research assistantships as you would a job. And you'll want some nice, clean bullet points to explain what you did on the job and especially what you accomplished. Did you develop a method? Did you get a grant for X number of dollars? And so forth. Tip number 9, publications. This is the toughest thing you'll need to change, is your mindset towards publications. In academia, a publication is an accomplishment. In industry, it doesn't generally matter. In fact, your publications often are going to be a separate document that you could have on your LinkedIn profile, or you could attach along with your resume when you submit an application. If you're very new to the job market, you may list 1 or 2 publications in a brief format, not all the authors, just et al. And if the job is for HPLC method development, and one of your publications is development of an HPLC method for X, Y, and Z, you'd list that. If it's not really on target, though, you might not list it at all. Tip number 10, be prepared to talk about your resume and answer questions on it during interviews. When you go into an interview, there'll be a room full of people, or if you get a phone interview, there'll be a room full of people on the other end of the phone, all holding that resume you submitted. Every little item in there they can ask you about. If you mention UPLC, they could say, what is it? And you should give them a 2, maybe 3 sentence description. What did you do with it? What was the toughest part about it, in your opinion? What would you think, how would you approach solving this sort of UPLC problem? You can imagine all sorts of questions. You ought to sit down with your own resume and try to picture somebody asking you questions based on what's in there. If you have something in your resume and you can't explain it, that's a problem. It looks like you either didn't prepare the resume or you just threw a bunch of stuff in there that looks impressive. But in fact, you'll look pretty unimpressive if you can't describe your own resume. There's a problem. Do not lie on your resume. Do not misrepresent your contributions or your skills. There will be background checks. People will call your references, so your references should be expecting a call. If you submit their names online or over the phone or to a recruiter for a certain job, you should immediately contact your references, give them a heads up that they could be getting a contact, and stay in touch with your references once or twice a year. And if necessary, send them a little bullet list of the things you did together and what you did well. And when you go to get a reference from somebody, just come up and ask them, would you be a reference for me and give me a good reference? If they say no, or if they give you one of these academic answers like, well, we should always give as many bad points as good points with a reference, get a different reference. Because if your PI or your colleague or your favorite teacher doesn't speak highly of you, that's a problem. If you state on your resume or in an interview that you'd like to be in management, does your resume or your history show that you've been building towards this? Or you just saw it in a TV show and thought, I'd like to do that? Did you supervise some undergraduates? Did you lead a team doing a project? Teamwork is very important in industry. If you collaborated with other labs, especially in other countries or other universities, put that in there as a collaboration and mention that when people bring up teamwork, because they will.
All right, we're open to taking any questions. So, does anyone have any questions?
Okay, so I've obviously been in the field for a while, but what I would like to know is that, okay, so if you're applying for a job, a lot of these companies now want you to apply via your resume online, but I was informed by somebody from a company that their HR team doesn't necessarily speak scientific jargon. So, what would you say, I guess, to make your resume, I guess, understandable by the HR team who's going to look at your resume first?
You tailor the resume. Each resume is going to be a little different. It'll be tailored for the job application. In that summary of qualifications or professional summary, you'll put a lot of keywords from the job description in there. Okay, so they'll take one look and match up the words with what's in the job description that some scientist wrote and maybe wrote poorly, and they'll match it up that way.
Yeah, and also just to add on to that, when you're reading through these job postings, they'll list specific skills like project management, team management, leadership, communication. So oftentimes when I see resumes, I see a lot of focus on the science and like the like for example the title of your dissertation or like what you characterize. But instead of focusing on the science so much, like also talk about those skill sets that you see in that job posting. Yeah, because that's what HR managers can resonate with.
Yeah, there are basically two buckets of traits you're looking for if you're hiring in industry. One is the technical side, and that's usually pretty straightforward from the resume and the interview. The other is the interpersonal. Are you a good fit for the culture? Are you a team player? Will you be a difficult person? Will they regret the decision to hire you? And that's a lot trickier. And you've got to bring that across, engage people, have questions for the company at the interview. If they say to you, do you have any questions? Have them. Ask about advancement at the company. Ask the people, what do you like most about working here? What do you like least about working here? And they'll ask you, what do you know about the company? What do we make? What do we do? What services do we provide? You should do your homework, to show that you're really interested in this company, because other people will have done this.
We have a question here.
Hi, Lou. Thanks for this workshop. I've got two questions. One is, what is your opinion on follow-up emails? Because I have heard some people saying you have to do that, and others like don't bother the HR manager. And the second question is, I've been to a recent workshop on resume writing, and there was something that was really controversial, which is, shall I, as a foreigner, put in my visa status or should I not? Because some people say, tell them from the beginning, and some others say, don't you ever do that. So what's your opinion on this?
So for the first question, remind me what it is again. Oh, for follow-up, yes. I always recommend doing the follow-up, even if it's the HR manager. Typically just a short, sweet note of saying, thank you for the time to interview. I really appreciated talking to you. It could even be anything that you want to follow up with. Like, let's say you talked about a certain tool or a skill set, or something that you've done and you wanted to kind of show off what you did a little bit. You can send like a link, so that would be a good time to do that as well. If you were talking about some sort of program and they weren't familiar with it, you follow up with some information on that. But typically, I just keep it short and sweet to like thank you for the opportunity to interview.
Yes, every person you meet, you should give a business card to and get one from, and send every one of them a quick email. I enjoyed meeting with you. I'm excited about the prospect of working at the company. 3-4 sentences tops.
And then for the visa question, so from what I've seen, and maybe Richard, you can follow up and answer as well. When you are applying, they'll ask you whether you need that support, and you can check it off then at that point. And I prefer to just be honest from the very beginning. Like, you don't want to surprise them with this information later on.
Right, the online applications will all have a checkbox for that. But putting it into the resume, I wouldn't. But if you get to a phone interview, say, then you'd mention this, and ask, would this be a problem? Because if it is, well, you're all wasting your time.
We have a question over here.
Hey, I have two questions that kind of go together. I just graduated with my bachelor's degree from the University of Alabama, and while I do have research experience, I don't have job experience. And I was wondering if you had any type of specific advice for someone who might have not much to put on their resume. And then my second question would it be appropriate to fill some of that space with activities you did as an undergraduate that speak to who you are as a person, such as volunteer work, any type of organizations you were involved in, or is that inappropriate for this type of resume?
If you don't have much experience, go with a one-page resume. For the volunteer work, if you're applying to work in a hematology clinic and you volunteered at a blood bank, yes. But if you clean up trash in the national forests and you're applying to work at a pharmaceutical company, no. Don't put your hobbies or your musical tastes, and certainly not your politics and religion and all that stuff. Just, it looks like fluff. It looks like filler. Just go with a short and simple one-page resume. If you're having problems finding a job, temping is probably, well, it's not ideal, but it's better than nothing, and you build up experience.
And to add on to that as well, that your research experience can also count as work experience. So if you've done any research as an undergrad, you can make those that can be experience under any work experience, right? And then you can just expand upon those with the bullet points of what you did and the outcome of it.
If you go with a temp agency, one thing you need to do is make sure you get the final proof of the resume they'll create for you to send out to potential employers. Because hiring manager or the HR people, recruiters, the temp agency employees, none of them are scientists. They don't know quite how to format this stuff. They'll do things like capitalize the P and PH if it's at the beginning of a sentence. And sometimes what comes out just looks terrible. They just copy and paste out of an online submission. So you need to go through and do the final check and make sure it's in the format we described here.
All right, we have another question.
Yeah, thank you. I just heard several. You just gave some sample examples of stupid mistakes that on the resume. Could you just list several more of stupid mistakes on the resume, please?
Okay, some stupid mistakes of a resume. I have to say some of the things I've seen is like paragraphs, full sentences, and so you want to have everything on your resume be bullet points because it needs to be skimmable.
Oh boy, one person misspelled their own last name. Misspellings in general, typos, And inconsistencies in format. If you end your bullet points, each bullet point, each statement with a period, they should all be like that. And trying to cram too much in, so it's all small type, no space, just filled, as if you're shoveling money at something. The more you shovel, the better. That's not the case.
I would say a lot of the templates that you find on like Microsoft Word, if they're really complicated, that's going to be really hard for a hiring manager to sort of follow through because they only spend about 7 seconds on your resume. So at most they would want to know who you are and what you bring to the table. And if that's like muddled in your resume on page 2 or somewhere down at the bottom, then they're not going to find that easily.
Be careful about looking up resume writing advice online. You'll see things like create your own personal brand, in the blogosphere and the way to write certain statements. And for a room full of scientists, we don't care about that stuff. It just looks silly. It looks like fluff. If you're applying to write copy for Google ads, sure, that's great. But here you should have a certain skill set. You should have, some interpersonal skills, some teamwork ability, and when you show up, you should be prepared and be interactive. If you come across as distant or unprepared or creepy, people are going to think, do I want to spend the next 10 years working side by side with this person? And probably not.
Oh, I wanted to add in one more stupid mistake I see is an objective statement. So right after contact information, I see people have an objective statement saying, my goal is to work in R&D, right? That's really not saying anything. One, because you've already applied to a position in R&D, so it's obvious that you want to work in there, right? So that's really just a waste of space. And instead, that's why we recommend doing the summary of qualifications.
References available on request. You should already have your references lined up and provide them when asked. You don't need to put that in there. It's filler. Anything, listing your high school, listing your summer jobs at Walmart, none of that. None of that matters to a lab position at a biotech company.
I think we have another question, a few more.
I was wondering if you have any advice on cover letters, like how long they should be or who reads them. I always have trouble writing those.
1 page, that's it. Nothing, 1 or 2 short paragraphs. Mention something about yourself. It's relevant, but not necessarily in the resume. And say that you're excited about the company and mention something that indicates you've done your homework. But that's it. And attach it when you attach your resume to an application. Because other people are going to do it. Some will do it, some won't. So you want to be in the group that does it. Over time, you'll build up a little library of resumes and cover letters. And so you can sort of copy and paste, and it gets a lot easier.
This may be a weird question, and I don't even know if you guys can answer it, but is any of the advice you're giving specific to US companies, or is it like common sense for industry standards?
Half and half. The short resume is U.S. specific. In other countries, they want almost a CV, essentially a CV, certification. I've heard in England that the references are absolutely critical, and the resume and that sort of thing are sort of secondary. So this is U.S. But what I told you about not making mistakes in the resume and being prepared at the interview and being interactive and show that you're a team player, that's everywhere.
Is it more appropriate to send someone a thank you card for your interview, or is an email or like better? Because I've heard that some people they'll specifically only hire someone if they get like a thank you card back, which is really weird in particular, but I've heard that a few times.
I say no to the thank you card. Typically in the past, I've always just done an email. I think the whole notion of a thank you card was like before email, right? But now it's easier to just email email the point of contact and say, hey, can I get the email addresses of everyone else that I interviewed with, and then send a thank you note to each of them via email.
Right. If you're, again, applying, to a public relations firm, maybe the thank you card's the extra mile, but an email's fine.
All right. Well, thank you guys for coming today, and happy hunting.
Good luck.